Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Security Repo podcast. Today, we're going to be diving into the topic of the software supply chain and how attackers, malicious actors are really abusing this to great effect. We have a really interesting and very cool guest that I'm excited has agreed to come join us today. We have Jossef Harush Kadouri, who is joining us from Checkmarx, but is also the founder of Dustico, which was acquired by Checkmarx and has been pretty much consuming himself with the topic of software supply chain attacks for quite some time. I had the privilege of first seeing Jossef speak in the AppSec Village at DevCon 2 years ago, I think. And since then, we were able to meet up in Finland at a conference called T2, and I was able to convince him to come on the show. So Jossef, thank you so much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you here today.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited that you're here as well. There's a lot of things I want to ask questions about around the acquisitions and living through that, but this is a security podcast. We want to focus in on for our audience and supply chain. But before we get into all that, I would love to hear a little bit about that journey. Going from working for yourself, founding companies to Checkmarx. Can you just take us through like the quick high level of how you got to focusing on supply chain?
I started off my journey as a software engineer at Israel Defense Forces. This was my first job, actually doing some software engineering. Later on, while I served in Israel Defense Forces, I joined the cyber emergency response team, and I researched malware samples, all kinds of incidents, reverse engineering. So this is where I got my first experience with actual research. Later on, I continued. Once I finished my mandatory and extended service in Israel Defense Forces, I joined the startup company. I was the first employee. That startup company called Cyberx. And I actually spent some 5 years. I seen the company grew for up to, I think, 100 employees at the point I left. And it tickled me after those 5 years where I had so much fun creating a lot of systems, like, doing the hands-on on the actual servers and front end and back end, all around hands-on experience. It tickled me to create my own venture. So I co-founded my first startup company called Zero Networks, doing network security, and today focusing on microsegmentation. And after 2 years, while we created this company with my friend Benny, who's still leading the company, I collaborated with my dear friend Sachi, which I work with at Checkmarx till this day. And we had the idea of, we're using open source. Everyone contribute to open source, but if someone's going to infiltrate malicious code inside, who from the security vendors is going to detect it and catch it? So we cooked that thought and had some experiments, like proactive and experiments, publishing some packages for collecting analytics, scanning those packages with security tools, static analysis tools. At the time 2020. Or like the I don't want to drop names, but we had zero detections. Like the majority of the solutions focused on detecting vulnerabilities. So we had some idea. Let's create the antivirus for open source, for specifically designed to detect malware in packages. So we focused all of our time and effort and our savings in that venture we called Dustico, and we moved so fast. After almost a year, we got an acquisition proposition where we had some employees and customers, and data feed. The product was data feed, and we joined Checkmarx. Ever since, we continued building the team, conducting research, trying to fight and tackle attackers in open source, because we see a lot of individuals, groups, nation states active in our many ecosystems of open source. And since it's not designed for security, It's an ongoing problem. Personally, I love open source. I contribute to many projects. I answer questions on Stack Overflow, and it was a great thing to combine both my hobbies, my side projects into uh, the latest venture.
It's awesome, man. You said something really quick there, and I just want to circle back to it. Did you say that the reason you created that Network Zero was because you wanted to make cool T-shirts?
Not cool T-shirts, but what you see here is one of my. In Hebrew, it's called the Yetzer Hara. I live in Israel, and I have some crazy thoughts from time to time. Some thoughts continue to compile to reality. Some thoughts are going for the trash. So I had some idea to create bizarre T-shirts, and I went for it. And I say to people that look strange on this T-shirt, P equals NP. I'm the proof. You see me on the first week. Walking around Checkmarx offices was like getting a lot of looks, like what the fuck. But, yeah, I also grow hot peppers. I ride motorcycles. I have some crazy attraction to bizarre hobbies and side projects. So yeah, if you have some weird stuff, like weird ideas to contribute to my side projects to be, feel free to tell me.
I love it. I love it so much. The thing that like freaks me out so much about your introduction is, you went from startup to acquisition in like a year or under 2 years. I think that's like one of the most impressive stories I've ever heard. It takes it. I had a startup prior to this, and like we had no idea what our final product was going to be after a year. It took us an entire year to figure out what the heck we were doing. So that's such an impressive timeline.
Yeah, thank you very much. We were on point, focused, laser focused on the problem we wanted to solve. We knew exactly what we were going to do. We moved very, very fast, almost without any pivots. So that tremendously helped us, and we truly believed, invested our savings into that, raised no money till the point we sold the company. So that helped us to move that fast. We had no investors to have board meetings or any other I don't want to call it time spending meetings, but we had zero of that. So
yeah,
that helped us to move very fast. We knew exactly what we were going to do.
I could really ask you thousands of questions about this, but I'm going to have to get us back on track because this is a security podcast, and we do need to talk about security. But we're going to be talking a lot about the software supply chain, and I think most people will probably be familiar with software supply chain attacks. But just for those listeners, we get a lot of kind of broad listeners in here. Could you define, like, when we're talking about the software supply chain, what specifically are we really talking about?
Buzzwords aside, software supply chain is a process. Okay, we know it. We can imagine a diagram of developers getting some specification. This is what we want to create. And the next stage is they create code, and it goes for the build server, the source control, and then for the build component, CI pipeline, collecting dependencies, producing an artifact. So you have imagine a chain of links, and every component is a link in that chain. Eventually, the last step is you have your artifact, and someone, either a software component or a human being, consuming that artifact. And it goes on and goes on as we create new releases or create new software. This entire process, this is what I call software supply chain, might be affected if you breach any step. It doesn't matter if your credential, software, your GitHub credential is being leaked and then misused by threat actors, or you have in your build server like a bad configuration, or even worse, a malicious plugin or component, or if you used a poisoned open source component and it infiltrated in that process, and then your build artifact is going to contain that malware. And the damage might be stealing information from your customers, or your organization secrets, or even a single developer GitHub credentials accessing the organization private repositories. We're seeing a lot of attacks happen and started this way. So imagine this chain of links, and it doesn't matter where a threat actor breaches that process, that chain, it's going to affect drastically the end result. So this is how I describe.
So thanks for laying that out. Again, we have a lot of people listening who are new to security, a lot of people that are trying to transition to security. So let's talk about the security aspect. And that starts really with the threats and understanding like what are we defending against. So can you just give us a quick high level of how attackers are targeting the supply chain at various points?
So at the time we started, it was very easy for attackers. It's still very easy, but it was even easier because there was almost no focus on that area to publish content and to gain control using third-party packages. The culture of developers, as we know in the last years, is to move fast, move agile, be more productive, not to reinvent the wheel. I like to say a good developer is a lazy developer, or let's call it efficient developer. If you have a requirement to dump logs in a file, you don't necessarily need to create that logic from scratch. You can use any great logging packages out there in the open source with the proper license. So we have this culture of, okay, let's build software faster, let's use open source more. And attackers understand that whenever they publish new content to open source registries, it has zero vetting, and developers not necessarily know that. So you have this bizarre blind trust. Developers rely on open source and trust open source, but they're not checking the code they're actually installing on their endpoints, or even worse, contributing into their organization, into their projects. When attackers started to understand that more and more, we saw a lot of activity in PyPy registries, NPM, Nugget, all kind of campaigns, either purposed to steal credentials, or to deploy crypto miners, or to purposely infect systems, as we've seen in the last months in the most crazy supply chain attack, the XZ incident, to create a secretly backdoor in every modern Linux machine. So it was, it can be to create secret access, it can be to earn money, to steal information, to target their specific companies. We saw many campaigns targeting companies. And when this is the lowest hanging fruit in the software supply chain, this is where we see the most threat actors focus and active. There are plenty other areas where we're starting to see more and more threat actors, but by far the software third-party dependencies is the most highly prioritized and scary scenario we know today.
And that makes a ton of sense. If you go after one company and you succeed, you infiltrated one company, and it's not good. But economy of scale here. If you like XZ is a great example. If that would have actually been more successful, because it was moderately successful, I would say it had already got installed in tens of thousands of machines. But if it had gotten into millions, maybe hundreds of millions of devices around the world, and that's a lot of attack surface.
Yeah. That was the most. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say let's talk about XZ, because this one was crazy. And I, what other kind of? I'm just trying to think how to phrase this. So XZ, the process of basically what happened was someone managed to take over an open source tool that was being used in the core Linux project. So it basically could have infected anything running Linux. I mean, how does this happen? I mean, this seems like such a insane. It seems like such an insane component to have been infected. And I remember, when it all happens, you look at it and okay, it's incredibly important, but there's not too many eyes on this if you look at kind of the contributors on GitHub and everything. How on earth does this happen?
So I have a lot of opinions about this incident. Let's start with how such incidents happen. So it started by adding more contributors. Why? People start projects, including myself, and time goes by. You move your 100% of focus in your ventures, in your startups, in your family, whatever. People, they move on. They start something, but they're not necessarily going to be invest their whole life in those projects. So you have projects on the internet piling up requirements or issues or requests or features, and it has no low maintenance. And those actors behind this crazy attack, most sophisticated attack we've witnessed so far. And I think nation states is behind this. It smells very, very sophisticated, like some. I don't want to drop names, but it smells like nation state. So those threat actors planned it for years. They created user accounts, dummy user accounts, and they created fake communication in those projects, building up reputation. Hey, like actually contributing code and gaining trust over several years, and then gaining full access to that repository, to that project. So it took them years of planning, years of focusing and identifying this project is some kind of abandoned and low maintained. That allowed them to have the social engineering move of, hey, look at that guy, he's creating a lot of effort. The original maintainers, are not investing as you invested before. So please give him credentials to continue maintaining and doing his great job. And that was the first step, getting control. And the actual engineering behind it was very, very impressive. Very impressive. I remember the weekend, it was Friday, that cool guy from Postgres, I forgot his name, he reported it, and then it was like a massive, everyone is on it, trying to understand what happened, how it happened. Social engineering and people moving on with their projects. I'll tell you a similar story. I'm not part of the statistics, but I also abandoned an open source project. I abandoned multiple, but one specifically, I got like all kinds of requirements. And a student approached me and said, "You're busy. I understand it, but I have some time and I want to get engineering experience. And this project looks cool. I'm using it, so I want to be a maintainer." It's a person from a different country. I don't know who that is. I can see some profile on social media. So I did some checking, but I ended up giving him access because I have no interest in continuing investing my time in that project. In a different scenario, I can be now part of the statistics. I don't know, but people move on with the project they started. So It's a problem. It's not going to stop. There is no magic solution for this attack.
Yeah, because the other side of that problem is complete burnout. One of my friends from the Drupal community had a module that was used by, I think, 100,000 projects, which isn't everything in Drupal, but still 100,000 projects. And he said the best thing about being an open source maintainer is that you have 100,000 people using your tool every day. And he said the worst part about being an open source maintainer is you have 100,000 people using your tool every day, and they have all sorts of questions. And at some point, like, You just need a break. You just need somebody to step in and say, "Hey, I can do this." Um, but yeah, that area of trust. Because if I was a maintainer of XZ and had the community member who would, hey, they've been responsible for months now. Okay, they've built my trust. So how do
Yeah,
we build in some kind of verification that it's not just an elaborate advanced attacker scheme?
yeah. I that's a problem. I can't think of a solution. I mean, and I think that amount of sophistication, both social engineering and actual engineering, technical, the actual payload, how it went through several stages, and it hid in a corrupted archive file. This amount of genius in planning this attack must be, in my opinion, a nation state.
Right. Yeah. There's some very interesting opinions that perhaps are best not shared about how this was discovered and
Yeah,
areas like that, because the whole thing is just crazy. And it makes you kind of realize there is probably multiple other XZ type packages where they haven't been turned malicious yet, but that nation states or people with malicious intentions are actively maintaining to try and gain trust right now. It kind of makes you realize this can't be an isolated incident. This has to be, you wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. So there must be multiple cools that are kind of being taken over here. It sounds very precarious. I have a question on you were at Dustico. You were looking at finding malware inside open source tools. So for the audience, most you have a class of software called SCA, software composition analysis, that checks if open source has known vulnerabilities against them. But am I right in understanding that at Dustico you were looking for the malware itself? So you would, but there doesn't need to be a classified or a documented vulnerability in it. You were looking for actual malicious code. Is that right?
yeah, that's right. The most difficult task we had at that time is to tell the customers we met and why the modern solution that doing vulnerability detection are not going to detect a stager, like even static analysis tools. If you have the very simple malware, 2 lines of code, just import URL lib or request or any other HTTP library and then make an HTTP call and get a response and execute it, it's not going to understand what's the later payload. It's a
Mm.
stage. And static analysis tools were blind at that point. Uh, and convincing. This is how we started the conversation and telling people, okay, so the modern scanners are not detecting this kind of attacks. This is why we need an additional solution, additional type of scanner that is combining multiple techniques. We implemented, like, we took our experience from the um, from our previous experience analyzing malware, sandbox analysis, dynamic analysis, and implemented for open source packages. It was even a bit simpler because most open source packages go through similar steps. Like when you install them, some payloads are executed, or when you import them, or the most advanced hiding their payload in some very exotic functions inside. So they have to be very specifically targeted. Um, so we build a sandbox dynamic analysis based on containers for open source that is actually detonating the candidate package and monitoring the file system activity, the network, creating a log of what's happening. And we planted bait files and all kind of monitoring, TLS decryption, man in the middle, all kind of techniques to have a very very wide log and then analyze it and detect all kind of attacks. Some are easy to detect, some are more complex, but that gained us better visibility. And implementing that on containers helped us doing that on scale. And we don't need to wait for someone to ask us, is this open source safe? Because we do that in the background as fast as possible while it's being published. So that gave us a leverage of analyzing it ahead of time.
Yeah.
That actually leads us into where we want to go next with the conversation. We've been talking about all the scary parts of this, like the very hard to solve parts of this. But you just started addressing like, what do we do about that? So if you can tell, if you'd be so kind as to address the people in our audience who might be brand new to this and haven't really thought of how do I secure my software supply chain, where would you even get started? Where would be like the first steps you would recommend, like if someone hasn't done anything yet to go down this route?
So one of the things I would recommend for consumers of open source, not necessarily need to be software developers. It might be DevOps engineers, might be all kind of people that actually install open source components, is to check using tools, free tools available on the internet. You have deps.dev project by Google. You have socket.dev from a company, startup company called Socket. They have very, very nice dashboard tool when you can actually browse the package content. Debricked, Sneak Advisor, and plenty more. So I would recommend to remember before you, as a consumer of open source, before you do open the terminal and hit pip install something, to check it, actually inspect it, to have a look on the project history and the package history to see the user is not a new user. And if you can allow yourself, I would recommend using not the latest version. If you have, depends on the security vulnerabilities, if any. But if you have the capability of using an earlier version, that might be putting you a bit statistically on the safer side. Because we have witnesses of popular projects getting hijacked, like the maintainers' credentials being leaked or guessed or stolen, and then threat actors abuse that and just publish malware for millions of users instantly because they just install the latest versions. And it takes some time until it's detected and removed. So vet your open source, and if you can, don't install the latest if you can allow yourself. That's my approach.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love what you say there because security is always at conflict with each other. Sometimes I feel, and you have like camp number one that's like you need to patch everything immediately, and you have camp number two that's kind of like no, you should patch responsibly because I think the actual statistics I read somewhere it's like it takes 3 months on average for a vulnerable or malicious package to be detected. So I think it's really interesting, but I mean, patching responsibly is what you're kind of getting on there. If there's a vulnerability, okay, patch it immediately. If not, and everything's working, take your time. Don't panic into this stuff because I feel like a lot of it can be and be mindful. And there's so we try and keep these episodes to half an hour, and we're already approaching it. So I know we're going to go over, but I mean, when your presentation, you had so much scary things in there, including like something I never knew about is that you can actually like hijack the stars from another open source
Yeah,
project, and so so everyone's if you vet your open source project and it's got 10,000 stars, it still could be fake. It still could be malicious. It's this whole
yeah,
okay. This world's bonkers. It's
yeah.
it's terrifying.
I want to describe this attack technique. Very cool attack technique. But to give a shout out to PyPy, they added a disclaimer. I think it was 2 months ago. Like this information has not been verified by PyPy. If you look into and open
Right.
projects now, you would see that marked somewhere. But the idea is whenever you upload content into PyPy, it's going to be published immediately as long as the name is available, the package name. It's like a domain name. If it's occupied, you can't hold it. But if it's free, then your content is being published immediately. You can put inside the package code whatever you want, and you can describe it however you want. And in the metadata fields, you can state that this package is being maintained on that, and you give a GitHub repository URL, and that's it. And no one checks if it's actually true. And whenever you state a GitHub repository in your package, it's being displayed and fetched. All of the stars and forks and all of the statistics from that GitHub repository is being displayed on the PyPy and more package registry, by the way, being displayed. And as you as a developer thinking that's credible. So what we see threat actors doing, uh, they're creating similar projects, but with stolen description, with links to repositories they have zero relation to. And whenever developers, consumers of those packages, like check it and they see, okay, it has like 10K stars, just for example, so it must be credible, and maybe it's verified, and this is what you feel. This is what I felt before deep diving into that field. And when I show it to developers, they go like, whoa, that's crazy. And I think this is starjacking. This technique is like, okay, this is a true problem in our blind trust we give.
Yeah, it makes you understand the blind trust that we have when you look at this, because I mean, yeah, like before you had showed me that, I would have saw. I mean, honestly, if there was a project, it had 10,000 stars, it did what I needed. Like I'm probably not going to like open the source code and go, all right, let's see if there's any kind of malicious calls going
No,
on
no
here.
one has time
I'm
for
just being
that.
honest, Yeah.
I just want to point out that attack goes well beyond just the supply chain. That is an Amazon technique. You can take an old listing that has a bunch of positive reviews. So that's why you see, like,
Really?
you buy an air conditioner or something, and you see all of the, like, these 5-star reviews, and then you read them and they're like, yeah, the shoes fit great. And yeah, these are the best sandals I've ever bought. It's like people can scrape out the
Man.
content and put whatever they want in there and literally starjack your repo. So be careful on when you're buying stuff online as well, not just here. Hey, wouldn't be able to make a podcast in 2024 without asking you your hot take on how AI is influencing this whole mess of supply chain security.
Well, I'm considering myself as a tech guy. I love to stay up to date with all of the cool latest toys and cool technologies. But in the last year, every day there's a new thing, a new project, and it's so hard to follow up. And I see people rushing and adopting in production systems all kind of magic solutions. And I'm not saying AI is something you shouldn't use, but it's like crazy rush and hype into let's use AI for that and for this. And you have a new attack surface. I mean, we discovered very easy approaches into poison models, into adding malicious code whenever you load it, or um, whenever you train the model. If someone uh, manipulate the data, and the model is going to produce bad results. So, for instance, if you're using code completion models, and and is a complete new attack surface. We still trying to understand how to secure it. It's still being developed. I don't know what's going to happen in the next months. No one knows, but it's like hard to imagine how it's going to develop. It's exponentially grows. Um, and there are some incidents we saw on Hugging Face, secret stealers, credential stealers, malicious models, techniques to poison models, formats, models being poisoned on their data sets. And it's just the beginning, because it's even harder to inspect. In packages, you have source code, even if it's minified or obfuscated, it's still something you can scan easily in some way. When you have a large blob binary file of gigabytes, tens of gigabytes, it's a harder problem. It's not readable as as compared to packages and the same for humans. Um, and you need to create different and new tools to tackle it. Uh, it's going to be fun.
Well,
As the week we're recording this, just pointing out, this is the week that the Hugging Face
yeah.
platform got breached, and Spaces has been breached, and about 100 instances of malicious. Or no, I'm sorry, that's an older attack, but yeah. Now we have to be even more concerned. If you're getting anything on a Hugging Face at all, double check, just double triple check this week, or I guess in the future when you're hearing this.
Yeah, yeah. So they got access to secrets from Hugging Face. There's been unauthorized access there. We don't know how bad it is, kind of yet, but
It's breaking
I think
news as
anytime
we're
when a company sends you an email that says, "Hey, we've detected unauthorized access in the place we store our secrets," that's probably never a good sign. So Hugging Face is a little bit scary talking there.
When you look at Hugging
We're
Face, I have a lot of respect to Hugging Face. When you
oh
compare
yeah,
it to GitHub, it's like GitHub. Again, my personal opinion. Like a couple years ago, security-wise, it's just like they had a lot of features to implement. But I think they're going to get there. But you see the gap.
yeah, and I mean, like this is just what like I guess I want to live in a world where this isn't just the norm. But when you're developing something at this rapid pace, I mean, like we're developing AI. It's such a fast pace, and every single company is in the race because every single company is competing with each other. Like no one feels that they can take the moment to be, to I'm going to build the most secure AI platform because you're just going to get overtaken. So I mean, it's panic, but I always love the advice that you can't be scared of this. You just have to be responsible, and we have to move forward. And this is the world that we live in. But we're going to get we're going to get there. Look, Jossef, we're coming to the end closely, but I just wanted to give a quick shout out. You're working for Checkmarx. If our audience have never heard of Checkmarx before, could you give a quick shout out about what Checkmarx does and I guess how it ties into the conversation that we've been having?
Sure. Checkmarks, creating tools. Started with creating a SAST tool, still creating the SAST tool, helping developers to create software securely. It can be by identifying your custom vulnerabilities if your developer is creating contributing code and unknowingly contributing vulnerable code, detecting such kind of vulnerabilities, having the awareness of if you're using third parties, uh, helping to have a visibility of their vulnerabilities of your third parties. With our addition in the last couple of years, awareing that if your developers used installed malicious packages, malware originated from open source, secret scanners, dynamic analysis for production systems like DAST scanners, um, and basically like a suite platform of solutions for and tools for application security, helping you focusing on creating your business logic as a software organization, while bringing you an umbrella of application security tools, scanners to help you move forward and focusing on your business logic while keeping you secure. This is, in a nutshell, what Checkmarx does as a company. Very mature company, 16 years, I think, founded by a good friend, served in the same military unit I served. Um, and yeah, a very good company to work for.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds cool. I definitely one of the, as one of the fundamental security companies that you always hear about, and yeah, it's good to a good solid security company securing your supply chains for many years. And a shout out to the Checkmarx research team who also help contribute a lot to keeping this space safe as well.
So we'd like to play this little game with everybody that comes on the show, kind of to wrap things up, and that is best advice, worst advice, worst advice. Um, So what's the best security advice you ever heard, you've ever given, that you currently think is out there? Just the one piece of good security advice for the public.
So I have a question that I have an answer for both questions, the same answer. Okay. Use enable MFA, enable multi-factor authentication. I mean, it's obviously good. It's a good advice, but in software systems, even though we have MFA, even several steps, we create automations. We have like all kind of API tokens, personal access tokens, and those kind of passwords, long passwords, auto-generated by the system, bypass those mechanisms. So I would consider that maybe not that great advice for like in a mindset. I'm not secure 100% or close to 100%, even when I enable the MFA, because those, if leaked, bypass immediately, my access to those accounts. A good advice on that context is to, if you can, minimize as possible the scope. But if you want
like
something
that.
funny, I can think of something funny.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. I really like this because I mean, this is so much of what security is about. Like the best advice that use MFA, use it everywhere. But if you blindly
So,
trust anything, including MFA, a session cookie can bypass it, and if you don't have additional responses, then you're going to get stung. I love it. That was great. That's one of the better ones because I've never had someone
Yeah,
combine the same question for both before. That's the first.
that's first.
Look,
Yeah, I
Joseph,
just
we're sorry.
go.
Go, Dwayne.
I just wanted to add on there. I recently had kind of the same epiphany. I saw a presentation, I forget where, that showed like 4 different levels of MFA security. And now I'm always telling people, like, instead of turn on MFA, it's like, make sure you're using phishing resistant MFA for your human identities. Like, that's a full sentence. There used to just be enable MFA. Now it's like specifically, let's make that harden that, hardware tokens, biometrics, like, let's get that stuff turned on, because that's really hard to get around.
Absolutely. Well, Joseph, we've come to the end of the show. It's been awesome to have you here. Super insightful. I'm really pleased that you agreed to come and share your time with us. Just one final question to wrap things up. You speak at conferences. You just told me before you're going to be in Paris next week, which will be in the past by the time we release this. But if people want to follow you, maybe check out if you were giving any presentations, I highly recommend it. Your presentations that I've been to are always great. But how can they follow you and follow kind of your journey?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not using Twitter/X, but you can follow me on LinkedIn. This is where I share. This is where I'm going to be. And if you want, I can, for free, go and do a personal session for your organization, for your R&D team. I love doing that. If you want, I can jump on a 1-hour call, just doing the full presentation. It's really an eye-opening session for many consumers of open source. And I think that would be a great thing to approach me for. Conferences are great, but this is, I think, more important. So feel free to reach out. LinkedIn, this is my favorite communication platform. Looking forward.
Great. And there's going to be links to LinkedIn and to other resources we've discussed here in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can find the links for that there. Jossef, one final time, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here. Dwayne, any last comments before I close off the session and hit the big red button?
No, I just want to say thanks very much for being here. This is an awesome topic to drill into. Scary as it is, it's some silver lining that there are people like you in the world working on supply chain security. Yeah. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. My honor.